have you back. Glad that you're here. Always hit that like. Why wouldn't you hit a like? And subscribe. If you want to be annoyed, you can always put on notifications. We're not pushing you for that. Available on YouTube and also on Facebook with our Position to Win book Position to Win book group. And check that out. With me, as always, the person who's going to ask me the questions, as if you were sitting here asking the questions, is the ever lovely Sandra. Sandra, welcome.
Hello, how are you doing?
Doing good, but this is the topic that's just got me steamed. So, all right, let's dive right into it.
All right. So it's misadventures of in dental care. So why do you call it the misadventures of dental care?
I have just had so much fun over my life trying to get dental work done. And I guess you could say, is it my fault or is it their fault or whatever it is? But every time I seem to want to get dental work done, I'm having to deal with the dentists who can't figure out what they need to do and how they need to do it and what needs to happen and all of these other things. And they're just a pain in the neck, just not fun to have to deal with. So it's misadventures because I've not had anybody that I've really stuck with for any length of time that I went, yeah, this is really good. I really like that. It's I know you've had your own fun with this process.
That's right.
Uh,
So why is it so hard to find a good dentist?
well, one of the things that put me at a disadvantage, we won't go back into antiquity when I was young, but what I did is I actually had a survey company, and what we would do is we would call patients and we would do a survey to see how people liked their dentist or didn't like their dentist or what they thought about their dentist. And I thought I was being very clever by calling it, you know, happy patient, happy dentist kind of thing, with a, like a, rich dad, poor dad kind of theme. And really, I should have called the service, irritated dentist, pissed off clientele because nobody was happy about that. So, you know, ended up doing it for a while. We ended and 15,000 surveys were conducted for dentists, and they were good surveys. I mean, they were good quality. But I got to read all of the, if you will, and it wasn't really the good, the bad, and the ugly. It was like the ugly, uglier, and horrific.
And can you dig deeper into those findings?
Well, out of all the dentists that I worked with, and there were a bunch of them, and these were, of course, progressive dentists, meaning that no, I'm talking about politics, but they were progressives in that they were trying to make their practice better and trying to do things. Only one dentist had across the board patients that really liked him, loved him, talked about him in just great terms, said, they started going seeing the dentist and they brought friends and family and they did all of that. And, everybody loved this guy. Too bad he's in like South Dakota. So he's a long drive for me. You're closer, but it's a long drive. And out of all the dentists I worked with, he was the only one that had positive reviews all across the board. So all I can say is it me or is it how the services is provided?
And is there one patient survey that stands out as the worst?
Yeah, you're. I in the beginning, I wasn't gonna. Having done lots of surveys for lots of different businesses, I'd read every once in a while, or one of the callers would say, "John, you got to listen to this one or watch this one or something." And my favorite one is that this woman was on there and she was there and she goes, well, and she wasn't too happy, but she was going to do the survey. And you could tell as we asked more questions, probing questions, in depth, trying to understand what was going on inside of her head, is that she finally broke down and she said, listen, if the guy wasn't my cousin, I'd be suing he's suing his ass right now if he wasn't my cousin. Now, no matter how you slice it, the point of these surveys was to get information about the practice so we could then, put ads on the internet, maybe, put them on a bus bench or put an ad or a circular that you mailed out or something. But I don't know how I was going to spin if he wasn't my cousin, I'd be suing his ass into a positive message. So that was a serious problem. And in fact, because of that, and because of being the purveyor, or actually the delivery mechanism of bad news, when they say, don't shoot the messenger. Oh, I didn't have any dentists were happy with me except the guy who everybody loved, and he thought it was pretty cool, and he liked the service. But all I can say is it wasn't a lot of fun, and in fact, it was a real pain in the neck, and that's why I got out of that part of the you know the world, because it was like, you got to be kidding me. Nobody likes their dentist. Now, if you're a dentist and you want to be, say, John, that's not true or something, you got to bring me evidence. You got to bring me something that's going to give me some kind of proof. Now, I can tell you that if you want to go out there and make things better and improve them, what you might do is you might pick up my book. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. It just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize that position to win. And you can pick this up physically from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever books are sold. You can ask for it by name. Also, you can go to our website, which is positiontowinbook.com, 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 and ask me to sign it, and I will, and I won't even have to grit my teeth to do it. Be happy to do it. Also, it's available in every, well, not every, 3 electronic formats: Kindle, Nook, and Apple iBooks. And then while you're at it, if you're sitting there saying, well, you know what, I'm now doing this, I'm learning all these things. Well, I want to go learn some other things. And how about Remote Work for a Better World, which will teach you how to do remote work in a better way. And while you're at it, just to help calm things down, maybe you want to have tea or cocoa or coffee, you pick up a Raging Verbalist mug, and that way you get a little bit of rage every single day. All right, Sandra, what is next?
All right, so let's talk about your current situation. So what's going on with that?
Well, that's part of the challenge, of course, if you're not happy with dentists, and I've never had a great relationship with dentists, is so I went to my wife's dentist, and she said, look, the guy is great. He's got hands that are nice, and he'll treat you right, and he'll know that you're a guy who doesn't really like him and everything. So it was a really good exam, and he's looking around and poking around, and we're getting the x-rays and getting all this other stuff. But once he gets through with the exam, basically he's gone. He's gone, and you're working with the rest of the staff. And I said, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. So they said, well, now we've got a hygienist, because you've got some decay problems, and we need to get in there and get deep and serious. So I ended up going to see a different hygienist. And of course, that was going to be more money, and it wasn't going to be covered by the insurance. This wasn't going to happen. And do you want to have this happen or that happen? And well, all of that. Now, this is all before I'm getting any other things working on it. And then wrapped up with that finally, and had paid a bunch of money out of pocket. And their finance person says, well, let me tell you what needs to be done, because the dentist that I never saw again during that period of time, who wasn't going to explain anything. So I went and sat in a little cubicle. Kind of reminded me of, like, going out and buying a used car. And she said, well, this is what needs to be done. And she had this whole long list of things. And she was showing me things and asking me to make decisions. And she said, well, there you go. I mean, this is what it's going to cost you, which of course was a a jaw-dropping, mind-blowing amount. And I said, wow, so that's everything? She goes, well, not quite, because you're being referred over to the surgeon. I said, okay, well, who's the surgeon? Well, we have one practice, but it's split into 2 companies. And the surgery is over this way, and the dentistry is over this way. And you got to go over there. And I said, well, wait a second. You're telling me that what I just went through, all of this time here, all of the sitting around, all of the, lots of noise and things that'll, drive anybody who's not a big fan of dental offices. Now I got to go again. Yep. Yep. So that's where we ended up on that first one, which, wasn't too good. It wasn't too positive.
So did it get better?
Well, it didn't get better, because I had to go to the surgical side. So that was a separate appointment. By the way, the people on the surgical side knew nothing about all of my trepidations, about my concerns, about anything. They didn't know a damn thing. Nothing. So they're sitting there looking at the x-rays and looking at the file while I'm sitting in the chair, and then looking at me and saying, well, you know what? There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. And I said, okay, how does this work? And she starts describing it to me. And I said, well, that sounds complicated. She goes, well, by the way, once we finish this part, then we send you over here, and then they work on that part, and then you come back here, and you're going back and forth. And now I'm back sitting there with the finance person with an entirely different bill, with an entirely different part, which is why they don't do it on all in one side, because, well, this way they can break it and separate it and see what they're going to get. And the woman says, well, I've called your dental insurance and this is what they're going to cover. And by the way, if you sign up here, we'll run your credit and see if we can get you financed. I was not happy because I said, first off, I'd like to go back and talk to the dentist. By the way, that's not how this practice works. And find out about, okay, what things can I get fixed? I mean, I came in with a problem. It'd be like going into, get something done on your car. And before you know it, you're buying a new car. Happens, I got it. And I said, well, that doesn't sound like that we're making much progress.
And so what did you do?
Well, first off, I didn't get anything done. I mean, and I lost because of their delays and all of that. I lost almost an entire year worth of available insurance because dental insurance, if you don't know how it works, is that it's done on a calendar basis. And that means, you get an allotment of dough, whatever that is that they'll pay on. There's always a fractional percentage. They never pay 100% on something. Well, maybe a little something. They'll give you a little piece of floss for free. There you go. That's toss that in or something. And so I went, you got to be kidding me. And I said, minor stuff that could have been done, which would have made my experience much better. Would it have fixed everything? I admit, no, it didn't. But now that's lost. And in the meantime, I end up breaking 2 teeth. And you know what? It just came to me that dental practices aren't designed to figure out how, the practice is really, you don't know how it's going to work until you're sitting in the chair and you're going over the waterfall. And would have been, why didn't I talk to the dentist? Well, obviously the dentist didn't like the confrontational aspect of having to tell people it's going to cost you a bunch of dough and this is how it's going to work. And by the way, we're going to break it up and do other things. The surgeon that I met on the other side, she was very abrupt. I got it. She says, yep, well, this is it. By the way, we didn't break them, we just fix them. Well, that's always nice to hear. Always nice to hear. So yeah. And yeah, so nothing got done, and I wasted a whole bunch of time. And teeth weren't getting better. In fact, they were getting worse.
And this sounds like an ongoing problem.
Yeah, it is an ongoing problem, and I've had other fun problems. Now, it was always great having consulting clients who were dentists. And years ago, I was in Colorado Springs, and turns out I needed a root canal. So I had this client who was a dentist, and he looked at it and said, well, I really can't work on you the way it's set up because we're going to need to be like multiple visits and on and on. And he said, so you really should see a specialist, and I'll give you the information you need to give him. So I called the number that he had, somebody that he knew, and I said, look, I'd like to make an appointment with, the root canal guy, the chief gouger. And the woman said, well, okay, you're being referred over by Dr. Chris, and I won't tell you his last name. And she said, but well, what number? I said, well, I think you got my number. And she goes, well, no, not your phone number. What number tooth is it? Now, for those of you who don't know, and I don't know why, maybe I missed this part of school or class or something, is that all your teeth are numbered, from 1 to whatever. And, including your wisdom teeth, which I had to have surgically removed years ago. And they talk about everything as a tooth number. So I said, okay. And she was very insistent. Well, you have to know the tooth number. And I said, 232. She said, 232? Yeah. Turned out that wasn't probably the right answer. So I ended up, I was, I got scheduled, went to see this specialist. knew that I was going to be in pain. And I showed up because I'm there. And the guy says, which tooth is it? And I pointed to it and he goes, oh, and he tells me, he says the number, and it almost felt like yelling bingo. But he said, oh, okay. And he goes in and he starts testing it. And he says, well, it's not reacting. And I said, well, it's because I took some, ibuprofen just a little bit ago. And he goes, well, didn't anybody tell you that you shouldn't take any kind of pain medication up to 7 days before? So that way we get an accurate reading. And I said, your office didn't tell me anything. Well, but the referring dentist should have told you that. Well, don't you think that your people, well, we only see people by referral. By the way, he did nothing. He did charge me $140 to tell me that he couldn't do anything. So yeah. And of course I had to pay the money up front. So yeah, yeah, I've had a lot of fun over the years with dentists. And and by the way, if you're out there and you listen and you're a dentist, yeah, sorry. I mean, I'm just telling you, not had great experiences with dentists. And even today that I'm going to dentists, it's kind of hard to get some stuff done. It's a slow process and it just seems to be harder than it should be.
And what's some advice for others about how to do it or how to find someone?
One of the things that I did was I ended up getting the x-rays from the efforts I did before. And I actually have, I had all of their paperwork. And when I went to the new dentist I'm seeing, I forced that dentist to read it. And then I asked him to interpret it for me. They don't like doing that, by the way, because dentists are like so many other professions. They don't trust anybody else in their profession. So, they've got to like see it themselves. Got it. But wouldn't you like want to read something that told you some of this stuff? I would think so. So I would say, maybe what you ought to do is find out dentists that have a reputation where patients actually like them, and it's a long, hard process to do that. And frankly, it I did a survey of people and I asked them, hey, does your dentist understand your dental health? Most people say no. In fact, it's a very small percentage who think that they do. So my only advice is make sure that you look at them carefully. And if you're not happy, I'm going to tell you right now, if you're not happy, and I used to not do this, but just basically walk out the door, don't deal with people who don't meet your sense of what you need to have for treatment and what you need to have going on.
And what lessons can you learn if you're an entrepreneur and a business person in sales or marketing?
Well, first off, the mistake that I see with dentistry, and yes, I'm not a dentist, I don't know this, is that it's an inside world. It's enclosed, and therefore everybody who's in the dental business sits there and they have no idea that none of us know what they're talking about. They have their own jargon, their own descriptions. Not only do they have numbers on it, but then they have all kinds of ways to describe teeth. It may be exactly what you need to do. But if you went to your bank and your bank spoke the same way, you would never give them a penny. So I think that one of the things you always have to ask yourself is that if you have all this technical jargon, all this vernacular, all of this verbiage, is that if nobody understands it, you're going to have a serious problem of having people like what you're doing because there's immediate distance between you and the dentist. If you can't explain it to people and if you can't go through that, then you're in serious trouble. Years ago, when I was selling high tech, I used to do training for the contracts people who are going to be essentially writing the contracts and approving the checks. That would be like important. And what I did is I would teach them about my technology. And it turned out over and over again, I would hear people who had been in procurement and buying these kinds of sophisticated systems for 5, 10, 20, one case 27 years, is that no vendor had taken the time to train them and to give them an appreciation about what they were buying and why there was a context to it and all of that. Dentists are the same way. Maybe teach me how to do it. I've watched videos, I've watched YouTube, and most of the dentists are stuck in their own little world. So what my recommendation, if you're an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, you're in sales or marketing, make sure that you don't create barriers when you shouldn't, because if you do, you'll end up with somebody like me who they probably could have gotten a lot more money out of over the years, because I would have said, I understand why I need to do this, and I was willing to pay the money to do it. And with that, I just want to thank you for joining us. And for myself, John Paul Mendoza, Dr. Speed Selling, and the ever lovely Sandra, this has been the Raging Verbalist number 277. Get a little rage, if you will, and we'll see you on the next Raging Verbalist.